Hello, everyone. This is the final video in which I'm kind of providing a commentary on the book, The Third Pillar. In this video, I'm going to focus on kind of a summarizing commentary and kind of discuss how the three pillars kind of balance each other. Okay, so again, we're discussing the third pillar, how markets and the state leave the community behind. And this will be the final lecture, summarizing, or I should really say, providing commentary on part one. Okay, so it's kind of some takeaway messages. Um, Dr. Rajan does an excellent job of talking about how three pillars come together to form the foundation of a healthy society. So the first is the proximate community. So this is like real human relational community. All right. That exists in the form of the family, um, church or religious institutions, um, social clubs, just your neighborhood, real proximate relational community. Okay. Another pillar is the state. And of course, you would argue that the state should be limited, somewhat limited, so not excessively large, but not too weak, right? So I'll just say a limited state. I don't mean that in an extreme sense. And then also a free market. Now, when I say free, not entirely free, so having some constraints, but a relatively free market. And that these pillars kind of coalesce to form a healthy society. So as I mentioned, the proximate community, that's represented by the family, networks of relationships, religious communities, social clubs, maybe even local government. Limited state, this is a state that is strong enough to provide certain goods to society, but has some limitations. It has sufficient power to levy taxes, defend the nation, to curtail the excesses of the market. But it's limited by law and constitution, and it's responsive to the interests of the electorate. So it is limited, it is constrained, but powerful enough to provide the goods that are proper to it. And finally, a free but bounded market. So by a free market, I mean competitive, a real opportunity for competition. As I illustrated with the farmers in the medieval manner, when competition is present, resources are allocated efficiently. Resources move from less efficient hands to more efficient hands. And what that does is it allows the society overall to produce more with the same amount of inputs. And generally speaking, that's desirable. And so, but a market has to be competitive in order to accomplish that good. So the free market needs to be a competitive market, a truly competitive market. Now, in order for it to be competitive, there has to be easy market entry and exit. So that is, it has to be straightforward in order for someone or a group of people to start a new business. That is, starting a new business and growing a business are not excessively constrained by, they're not excessively constrained by the state or even by the community. But the market should have certain constraints on it. Like it should have some constraints on it, bounded by certain measures to avoid excessive inequality, for example, bounded by notions of justice. Now, I'm actually going to go a little bit beyond Dr. Rajan in this part of the book. I'm going to add a fourth pillar, if I may. I would say that a healthy society also requires a robust natural environment. So, or in the words of Pope Francis, our common home. So does a healthy natural ecosystem is necessary for a thriving society. And in the past, let's say 100 years, or even just the past 30 or 40 years, technological and economic growth has really helped us to see that not only does this fourth pillar exist, it's also essential and really needs intentional cultivation. I say that over the past 100 or even, let's say, 40 years, that we notice this, um, not because it's not obvious in a sense, but if you think back to the medieval manner, there was really no concern about exploiting the natural ecosystem. In fact, the medieval manner, or the community in general, tends to be fairly economically, or I should say environmentally sustainable. And so the medieval society, it already, in a sense, protected, cultivated, maintained a robust natural ecosystem. Whereas the technological changes and the economic growth that really occurred through the ascendant market and the state and the social state periods um, eroded the community and eroded the natural environment. And so now we begin to notice the fruit of that. And it helps us to recognize what I think was implicitly obvious or implicitly present in earlier eras, like, let's say, the medieval era. And that is that the natural environment, the land, requires our intentional cultivation and preservation. Okay, so I'm adding this kind of fourth pillar, and I'll allude to it a little bit more later, but kind of picking up on the theme um, from from the third pillar book. These three pillars, they feed on each other, they interact with each other, they in some ways constrain each other, and they also support each other. All right. So what I want to do now is I want to just kind of go through and talk about how do the three pillars constrain each other. And then I want to talk about how the three pillars support each other. So this discussion is meant to help illustrate how each pillar really is essential in promoting a healthy society. So let's start off with some constraints. How do they constrain each other? Now, some of these things I think probably started to emerge from the conversation in the last video, but I think going through it explicitly will be helpful. Okay, so let's start with the state. The state acts to constrain the community. How does it do that? Well, the state seeks to centralize power, oftentimes, and by doing so, it will often shift power away from the community. The state can also provide services that crowd out the need for community. That is, it can provide services directly to individuals that, albeit good in many ways, can crowd out or make unnecessary or make less valuable the goods that the community provides, and therefore crowd it out, shift power away from the community. Okay. The community acts to constrain the market. How does it do that? Well, the community offers a space where behavior is not dictated by efficiency. And as I mentioned in previous videos, that I don't use the word efficiency to communicate some unambiguous good. The efficiency is a technical concept. In some cases, perhaps we really want efficiency, and in other cases, perhaps we don't. In the context of human relationships, we might not always want economic or productive efficiency. The community provides a space for that. And by doing so, it puts a constraint on the market. It says the market is not absolute. Religion, or the church in the examples that we've been going through, gives moral constraints on exchanges and market activity. Religion or the church often has something to say about the morality of exchange, of certain economic exchanges, and that puts a constraint on the market. In the Middle Ages, one poignant example, but by no means the only example, was how the church, especially in the High Middle Ages, sought to protect the well-being of the poor by forbidding usury, forbidding the charging of interest. Okay. Finally, the community provides for the material needs of people, but through non-market mechanisms. In this case, we could probably think about the family as a poignant example. The family is, let's say, the quintessential representation of the community. In the family, children receive goods not because they work hard and buy them, but because the family provides them voluntarily, and provides them not based on monetary arm's length transactions, but through love, through relationship, through custom. And so the family or the community more broadly provides material needs for people through non-market means. And therefore, in a sense, it competes with the market. It competes with or constrains the market, at least as an absolutizing framework for society. And finally, the market constrains the state. The market creates ties that cross state boundaries. For example, free market agents like companies and even individuals interact with producers and consumers all over the world, outside of the boundaries of state power. The market resists taxation and other constraints. The market allocates resources efficiently and regardless of the preferences of the state. So it moves, it takes actions that are outside of the preferences or the goals of the state. It doesn't always, at least, at its best, at least, does not operate based on the preferences of the state. And finally, efficiency, which is created by that competitive free market, efficiency, efficient production, efficient consumption, efficiency creates independence from the state. When a company, for example, is efficient, it doesn't need the state's support or protection. And therefore, it has a certain degree of independence from the power of the state. That allows it to push back on the state. The opposite, of course, is also true. If a company is inefficient and a company requires the protection of the state, well, that means that company is not able to push back on the interests of the state because it is beholden to it. Okay, so the market at its best, when it is really generating economic efficiency, it gives it a sense of independence from the state that allows it to push back on the state. Right? But now all this works in the opposite direction as well. Let's start with the state again. The state curtails the market. The state can regulate or tax the markets. The state can also confer exclusive economic privileges or rights to some agents, therefore reducing free exchange and competition. To elaborate on what the state can do, the state can provide constraints on the market that are designed to curtail market failures, for example. So the state can curtail or constrain the market. The market, likewise, can do the same with the community. The market erodes customary and relational claims to resources. As I mentioned with the farmer example from the first lecture, when one farmer is more productive than another, there's a natural process that puts pressure to reallocate resources from the hands of the less efficient to the more efficient. And so the market mechanism, its insistent pursuit of efficiency, can erode customary or relational claims to resources. The market also provides an alternative means of material provision outside of customary relational structures. So we saw this as we talked about the evolution of markets over time when the medieval towns started to grow and wages increased. This kind of created a source of drawing people out of the communities. Right? So the market, through its efficiency, can create contexts that draw people out of customary relational structures that exist in communities. The market also creates incentives for a kind of broad social and geographic mobility. So that is, the free market, because it moves resources around, it can result in a situation in which, well, the highest paying jobs are often in another city. And if that's the case, people might leave their home communities and move to another place. That geographic mobility disrupts community. Okay, and then finally, the community can constrain the state. The community provides an alternatives to the state in terms of provision of security and resources. This is kind of illustrated by that quote by Milton Friedman. So the community, in this case, primarily the family and immediate proximate community, is a source of material provision for the needs of let's say, the elderly. That was kind of the example of that Milton Friedman quote. The community can provide for the needs of the elderly. Because it can do that, it provides an alternative to the resources provided by the state. It makes the state less necessary, and therefore it can constrain the state. The community also provides an alternative sense of belonging and loyalty other than the state. When the community is strong, people identify with their community, perhaps even more so than with their country, pushing pressure back on the state. Okay, now, just as the different pillars constrain each other, they also support and amplify each other. So start with the state again. The state provides certain goods that support the community. So for example, the state provides national security. And that national security creates a context in which the community can exist in safety. The state exists to help enforce justice. The state can fill gaps when the community becomes dysfunctional or fails to meet its own goals. The state can also curtail the market. And as we mentioned before, the market can be a constraint on the community. So the state can step in, curtail the market, which gives more space for the community. Okay. The community can also support the market. The community provides for the material needs of people who are left behind by the market. So we know that markets allocate resources efficiently, at least in most cases, not always. We'll pick that up in microeconomics, talk about market failures. But in many cases, the market allocates resources efficiently. But efficiently does not mean equitably. In fact, the market mechanism allocating resources into the hands of the more productive can leave a lot of people behind. The community can provide for those people. So a healthy community can provide for those people, which actually helps the market because it allows the market the freedom to be able to allocate those resources efficiency and not have to worry about the negative consequences of the people left behind if the community is doing that effectively. The community also inculcates the virtues that are necessary for an efficient market. It inculcates kind of the pro-social norms, the pro-social virtues that are necessary for the market to achieve its full efficiency. The community can help solve market failures, and the community can provide public goods that the market does not do a good job of providing. Finally, the market supports the state. The market is the most efficient means of generating the resources that the state needs. And so when the market is strong, a lot of resources are generated. And so that gives the state the opportunity to generate a lot more tax revenue because there's a lot more economic activity that they can tax. The market can also help the state wrestle power away from the community by undermining the community. Right? So they hold each other in balance. And it works all in the opposite direction. So again, starting with the state is necessary for the market to flourish. The state can increase the scope of the market by providing peace, the peace that is necessary for markets to function, and increasing the geographic scope in which markets can operate. The state also protects private property, which is a prerequisite for the market. The state helps solve market failures, which protects the market from negative backlash from the community or from individuals. And it provides public goods that the market doesn't effectively provide. Right? The market can support the community. The market more efficiently produces resources, and those resources can be used by the community. It also raises the living standards of those in community, or at least it can. And finally, the community supports the state. The community populates the state with reliable citizens who are more self-sufficient. The community reduces the responsibilities of the state by providing for the needs of its members. And the community advocates for state action towards the common good or to curtail the market. And here again, I'm kind of going beyond the book by noting what I'm going to call a fourth pillar, the natural environment. The natural environment also has the same kind of interplay with all the other pillars. The natural environment provides the natural resources necessary for production, so it is essential for the market. But the market, though it's efficient, that efficiency does not often take environmental sustainability fully into account. We know this from economics, from microeconomics, as externalities. So the market can curtail or constrain the natural environment, whereas the natural environment provides goods that are necessary for the market. The natural environment provides the raw materials that are necessary for the market. Okay, now for the connection between the state and the environment, the natural environment provides the resources that are used by the state. And so therefore, the natural environment is essential or helps the state. The state And the state can also be helpful to the natural environment. The state can help address market failures like externalities and help to make the market more environmentally sustainable. The state can also be a hindrance to the natural environment. The state can damage the environment through war or through its own use of natural resources. Okay. And finally, the community also has a dynamic relationship with the natural environment. The natural environment provides the resources that are used by the community and therefore, of course, is essential. The community can also safeguard the natural environment through customary resource use, which is oftentimes more economically or environmentally sustainable, although not always. The community also helps to address market failures like externalities, which is the primary way where the market constrains the natural environment. But of course, the community can be quite inefficient in its use of resources. And so, although sometimes the community can safeguard the environment through customary resource use, it also has to be careful because inefficiency can use resources, well, inefficiently. Okay. One thing I don't have on this, but I'll kind of reiterate, the natural environment can also constrain each of the other pillars as well. So this can kind of go both ways. How would this work? Well, natural disasters can hinder the function of the market. Natural disasters can impose major costs on the state, and natural disasters can be devastating to communities. And so the natural environment also can curtail each of the others. Likewise, if the natural environment decays or becomes eroded, let's say, for example, if farmland becomes eroded, this will constrain the community's ability to produce resources for itself. It will constrain the market from being able to produce goods and services, and as a result, it will constrain the state's ability to raise revenue and to pursue its own functions. And so I think it's essential that we recognize that although the book focuses on three pillars, and perhaps rightly so, there really is a fourth pillar that also plays a critical role in this larger picture. Okay, so as we've mentioned, especially in the last video, at any given time, there's going to be an equilibrium between these pillars, where different pillars are relatively influential in terms of providing for the livelihoods and influencing the lives of people in a society. And at different times, these pillars will recede in the equilibrium for various reasons. There are a bunch of reasons. Technological change, policy changes, cultural changes, trends, shocks, or through the competition between the pillars, or finally, through the failure of a pillar to fulfill its own ends. And so pillars can recede when the equilibrium shifts to their disadvantage. So just as a couple of examples to kind of move towards wrapping up, the globalized economy through globalization renders the state weak in regulating the market. The state can become a prisoner to the wealthy market agents like companies. The book refers, so Dr. Rajan refers repeatedly to the idea of crony capitalism, where the state is really being driven not by the will of the people, not by the will of the electorate, but rather by the special interests of powerful corporations. Right? So different elements. So the market, for example, can encroach upon the state, weakening the state, shifting the equilibrium to the state's disadvantage. Likewise, the same thing can happen to the market. So for example, the market can oftentimes lead to extreme inequality, or economic downturns happen cyclically, which leads to anti-market sentiments that can shift the equilibrium to the disadvantage of the market. Likewise, the community. Policy or cultural changes can disrupt communities, weaken communities. Cultural changes can push towards individualism and away from community structures, which shifts the equilibrium to the disadvantage of the community. Likewise, pillars can recede when they fail to provide the goods that are proper to them. The equilibrium will shift away from the state when people lose faith in the state. When it fails to provide public goods, when it fails to provide national defense or to preserve justice, when it fails to represent the will of the people or to curtail the market or to correct market failures, people lose faith in the state and the state weakens. Likewise, the market. The market is not always efficient. We learn about this in micro, about market failures. When people recognize that inefficiency, they lose faith in the market. When market actors like businesses and companies collude with the government to erode the market, to harm the community and the individual, and even make the market less efficient, that erodes trust in the market and leads to an equilibrium that shifts away from the market. Likewise, the community. I think the book kind of speaks very highly and the importance of the community, but community is not perfect and community can be dysfunctional. Communities can be insular, dysfunctional. Communities can fail to achieve their own ends. For example, a community institution, a church, can fail to support the human flourishing of its congregants. The family can fail. Families can fall apart through divorce. Families, there can be abuse within families. The family can fail. And when the community fails, just like when the market fails or when the state fails to provide its own good, the equilibrium shifts away from it, weakening its influence. So each pillar can fail in providing its unique goods. What's the best response to these failures? I'll end this lecture and end this commentary with a cautionary tale. It can be attractive, and it has definitely been attractive over the past couple, let's say past 100, let's say past 200 years, maybe 300 years, to respond to imbalance between pillars or to respond to the failure of certain pillars with ideological responses. And I think a little bit of reflection, looking at the United States today, we might see a little bit of this, or perhaps a lot of bit of this, in the political discourse at present. So if we were to respond to the failure of the market by saying, you know what, let's get rid of the market. This results in an ideological response, what I might call ideological socialism. This would be like a far left kind of socialism, maybe think of communism, Marxism, which through history is incredibly detrimental to the common good. But it's an ideological response to the failures of the market. We might also have an ideological response to the failures of the state. Something maybe I'll just call ideological libertarianism, like a very strong notion of libertarianism, or a strong, excessively strong notion of limited government, something where the market is seen as absolute. On the far end of the spectrum, you might even find people who kind of believe in anarchy. There shouldn't even be a state. Strong ideological, I'll call it ideological libertarianism, that says, well, let's just reject the state. And likewise, you can see it here too. The failures of the community says, well, let's just get rid of the community. We don't need religion, faith, the church. We don't need family. We don't need proximate community. And that ideological response manifests in this kind of ideological individualism. Much of the fruit of that ideological individualism is very present and apparent today with some of the things that we mentioned in the last lecture. For example, rising loneliness and isolation. These ideological responses are problematic because they respond to failures of a particular pillar with an outright rejection of that pillar. The problem here is that each pillar provides essential goods and they balance the other pillars. And so, what's the best response is to reinvigorate and build healthy pillars. Perhaps not abandon the state and the goods it provides, not abandon the market and the goods it provides, and not abandon the community and the goods it provides, but to invest in each pillar, to cultivate the health of each pillar, and to wisely discern an appropriate, a healthy relationship between the pillars, wisely discern public policy that is oriented towards each pillar really capitalizing, operating, and providing the goods that are proper to that pillar. And this occurs at the policy level, but it also occurs at the individual level, the decisions that we as individuals make, and the degree to which we contribute to the building up of a healthy community, a healthy market, and a healthy state. Okay, so this is my commentary on part one of the third pillar by Dr. Rajan. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to jumping into part two and discussing the three pillars as we proceed through the course. Thank you so much.